It was an ordinary evening for Sarah, a college student who was enjoying the rare, quiet moment at home. Her parents had gone away for the weekend, and she had stayed behind to finish an important project. The house, though cozy, always had something strange about it at night, especially when it was empty. But Sarah didn't mind. She considered herself a practical, skeptical person. She had never believed in ghost stories. Around 10 p.m., she decided to take a break and went into the kitchen to make herself some tea. Everything was normal. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock in the living room. But as she stirred the sugar in her cup, she heard a noise coming from upstairs. A long, creaking sound, as if someone were stepping on the hardwood floor in the hallway. Sarah stopped, spoon still in hand, and held her breath. Maybe it was the wind, she thought. After all, the house was old, and these things happened all the time. She went back into the living room and tried to ignore the disturbance. But then another sound came, this time louder and more distinct, like slow footsteps. Her heart raced. Trying to stay calm, she walked up the stairs slowly, her phone in her hand and the flashlight on. "It's probably a mouse," she muttered to herself, trying to convince herself. When she reached the top of the stairs, the hallway was dark and quiet, but something seemed wrong. The door to her parents' bedroom, which she was sure she had left closed, was now ajar. "Is anyone there?" she asked, her voice shaking. No answer. Just an oppressive silence that seemed to grow by the second. Determined to get this over with, Sarah pushed the door open with a trembling hand. The room was empty. But as she scanned the room, something caught her eye. The large mirror in the corner of the room. It reflected something that shouldn't have been there. A tall, undefined figure stood behind her, motionless, just watching. Sarah's scream echoed through the house as she turned around, but there was no one there. The mirror, however, remained unchanged. The figure was still there, staring back at her, as if it were part of a reality she could not touch. Without thinking twice, Sarah ran out of the house and called the police. When the officers arrived, they found nothing unusual, except for one thing. The mirror was broken, and no one could explain how it had happened. Sarah never spent another night alone in that house. Jonas had always considered himself an independent person. He had just moved into a small apartment in the city center, away from his parents for the first time, and he was excited about the idea of having a space of his own. His first night alone in his new home seemed promising. The apartment was cozy, with exposed brick walls and a rustic feel that he loved. After a long day of organizing his things, Jonas decided to take a shower and relax. Around midnight, while he was on the couch watching a movie, he heard a low, almost imperceptible sound coming from the stairs leading to the second floor. It wasn't something he expected to hear at that hour, but he thought it might be a neighbor passing by on the stairs of the building. He ignored the noise, not wanting to worry about small things. But minutes later, the sound repeated itself, a soft whisper, as if someone was calling his name. Jonas stood up quickly, feeling a strange sensation of discomfort spreading across his skin. Maybe it was the wind, he tried to convince himself, but there was something about that voice that didn't seem natural. He couldn't identify where it was coming from, but the sound seemed to be coming from below, from the stairs that led to the upper floor. He approached cautiously, breathing faster, until, as he reached the base of the stairs, he felt a wave of cold that made the air seem thick. The whisper grew louder, now clearly saying his name as if someone was calling directly to him. "Jonas! Jonas!" With his heart beating wildly, he climbed to the top of the stairs with heavy feet, trying not to make any noise. When he reached the last step, the lights were off. The feeling of being watched was palpable. He looked around, but there was no one there. The room was quiet, except for the constant sound of his racing heart. Jonas approached the bedroom door, but something made him stop. He felt that he was no longer alone. Suddenly, the whisper echoed again, this time much closer to his ear, as if someone was behind him. "Jonas!" With a burst of adrenaline, he turned quickly. There was no one there, but the temperature in the room seemed to have dropped dramatically. The light in the hallway flickered briefly before going out, and the whispering stopped as abruptly as it had started. Jonas had never been able to explain what had happened that night. When he told his friends, they laughed, thinking he was just scared of his new apartment. But he knew that what he had heard on that staircase was not simply his imagination. Ever since that day, he avoided staying in the apartment alone at night, always with the feeling that something was watching him from the top of the stairs. Lucas had always been a skeptic. He liked to convince himself that everything had a logical and scientific explanation. When he moved into an old house in the suburbs, he didn't listen to the stories his new neighbors shared. They told him about strange sounds, doors that slammed by themselves, and whispers in the middle of the night. To Lucas, these were just urban legends, stories invented to add a touch of mystery to everyday life. The house, although old and with an air of abandonment, seemed perfect to him. Quiet, isolated, and far from everything he considered superstition. On a cold autumn night, while Lucas was home alone, he was organizing some papers in the office. The television was on at a low volume in the living room, but he wasn't paying attention. He was focused on his tasks when, suddenly, he heard something strange. A low but distinct sound. Bang! Bang! The front door was slamming. He looked up, stopping what he was doing. The noise was coming from there, from the living room, as if someone was trying to open and close the door repeatedly. Confused, Lucas stood up and walked to the living room. He was sure he had locked the door before settling into the office. It can't be, he thought. But as he approached the entrance, he saw that the door was, in fact, locked. He pulled on the handle, turning it and feeling the resistance of the latch. It must be the wind, he said to himself, even though he knew the door was very tightly closed. He checked all the locks and bolts again, making sure nothing was out of place. But as soon as he returned to the office, the sound returned. Bang! Bang! The noise was now clearer, more constant. It sounded like the door was being slammed hard. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew it wasn't the wind. Determined to find out what was happening, he stood up once more, with a growing sense of unease. As he entered the living room, the sound suddenly stopped. Silence filled the house, but something seemed wrong. He felt a presence in the air, something he couldn't identify. With some trepidation, he began to explore the house, feeling increasingly tense as he walked towards the hallway that led to the basement. That was when the noise started again, but it was no longer coming from the door. Now it seemed to be coming from the end of the hallway, near the stairs that led down to the basement. The sound was unmistakable. The knocking of the door had now been replaced by a quieter, more distant noise, as if someone was dragging something heavy or trying to get out of somewhere. But the strangest thing was that, even though he was alone, Lucas felt as if he was no longer in control of the situation. He approached the stairs with a fear he couldn't explain. The air grew thicker, and he felt a chill run down his spine. The whisper, low and almost inaudible, seemed to beckon him, but at the same time alerted him to an unseen danger. The noise was coming from inside the basement, a place he had avoided since he moved in. When he reached the top of the stairs, he hesitated. The air was freezing, and the darkness deep in the basement seemed to stretch on forever. For a moment, he had the feeling that something was there, something watching him. Despite himself, he slowly descended the wooden steps, feeling each step as if it were a weight. The sound was now louder, clearer, and seemed to come directly from inside the basement room. He stopped for a moment, listening. Silence reigned again for a few seconds, but then, like a snap, the chair in the basement began to rock on its own. He saw it from the entrance to the room, moving slowly, as if someone had been sitting there and had gotten up. A shudder took over his body, but he could not move. He was paralyzed, his eyes fixed on that chair that seemed to move with its own force. Suddenly, an old door, which Lucas did not remember seeing before, slammed shut with a bang. The noise echoed off the stone walls of the basement. He turned quickly, but before he could understand what was happening, the door slammed shut, locking him in. Fear gripped Lucas, and he began pounding on the basement door, screaming for help, not knowing if anyone would hear him. It wasn't until he finally managed to open the door and run up the stairs, panting, that he felt a presence behind him. Something was following him. He could feel the pressure in the air, as if something was about to reach him, but when he looked back, there was nothing there. Fear continued to oppress him as he ran out of the house. Lucas never went back to that basement again. He decided to sell the house, and the feeling of being watched didn't leave him for days.